You know, when you think about World War II, a few names probably pop into your head right away. Patton, Montgomery, Rommel. We see them as these larger-than-life figures moving armies around like pieces on a grand chessboard. But what if that's only part of the picture? What if the real war, the unseen war, wasn't fought with tanks and guns, but with paperwork and memos?
And that line, you've probably heard it. It's from the movie Patton, and it perfectly sums up the mythology we've built around these commanders. They weren't just enemies, they were these grand warriors in an epic story where you could even respect the guy on the other side as a magnificent bastard.
But behind that myth of battlefield respect, the real relationships were a lot messier, and honestly, a lot more toxic. So let's dive into the most famous rivalry of them all, in the Allied command, the bitter feud between America's own George Patton and Britain's Bernard Montgomery.
I mean, you could not have picked two more different guys. Patton was the loud, aggressive American cowboy. Montgomery was the slow, careful, and kind of snobby British aristocrat. Their dislike for each other was legendary, just fueled by these enormous egos and a total clash of cultures. And yet, the one thing they could agree on was a kind of grudging respect for their German opponent, Erwin Rommel.
Okay, so that brings us to the man himself, Rommel, the Desert Fox. He's almost always put on the Mount Rushmore of military geniuses. But when you start to peel back the layers of the legend, a very different and frankly a much less impressive commander starts to appear.
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And what's really wild is that a lot of historians, and even the guys who fought against him, have argued that his reputation was, well, massively overblown.
Let's just break it down for a second. First off, he got his big promotion because he was friendly with Hitler. His famous Ghost Division in France? Yeah, it was famous for just charging ahead so fast that his own bosses had no idea where he was. His biggest wins in North Africa? They were against a British army that was badly supplied and poorly led at the time. And here's the kicker. Germany saw the Eastern Front as the main event, and Rommel was never sent there. Even his opponents, like the Australians, figured out his playbook and found his attacks predictable.
This quote right here just nails it. Rommel was an amazing tactical leader for a small group of soldiers. A brilliant captain, for sure. But when he was promoted to general, he kept thinking like a captain, always focused on the little fight right in front of him instead of the big, strategic picture. He was quite simply promoted way past his skill level.
But okay, the drama didn't stop with the big-name generals. See, behind the scenes, a whole different kind of war was being fought. One general even called it an internecine war, a war between the Allies themselves over a simple question. How do you actually run a country after you've conquered it?
And this whole internal mess really boils over when the Allies invade Sicily. Because once you've taken the island, well, somebody has to govern it. So they create this massive, complicated bureaucracy called AMGO, the Allied Military Government of Occupied Territory. And this, right here, is where things start to get really messy.
So the original plan for the Allied headquarters was to keep it lean, about 150 officers. Instead, that number just exploded. It ballooned to over 1,000 people. It became this sprawling, top-heavy beast, a textbook case of bureaucracy going completely off the rails. And you can just imagine how the soldiers on the ground felt about it. This little parody they came up with says it all. The guys actually doing the fighting felt totally disconnected from this giant, chairborne force, as they called it, making all the decisions from miles and miles away.
Look, this whole bureaucratic nightmare wasn't just because of too many people. It was because the Americans and the British had completely different ideas about how to do things. The US wanted to run the show and make big, sweeping American-style changes. The British, on the other hand, had a ton of experience running colonies, and they wanted a more hands-off approach. The result? Endless arguments and, as one source put it, torturous negotiations that just wasted a ton of time.
So, you've got these generals clashing, these bureaucrats arguing, but what did any of that actually mean for the people on the ground, for the officers who had to somehow put a totally shattered Sicily back together?
While Patton and Montgomery were racing each other for glory, the AMGOG guys were fighting a completely different war. Their to-do list was just insane. They had to find food, fix bombed-out water pipes, stop typhoid from spreading, clear roads, manage the local cops, deal with the black market. They weren't fighting for territory. They were fighting against chaos, disease, and starvation. It was grueling, unglamorous, but absolutely essential work. And that really gets to the core of it, doesn't it? We love to imagine the generals' war, all clean lines and arrows on a map. But for the administrators, the war was fought in the rubble-filled streets and, quite literally, in the sewers, trying to get the water running again. So you know it was going to happen, right?
These two totally different worlds, the heroic battlefield general and the exhausted administrator, they were on a collision course.
And this one little story says everything. Montgomery is annoyed that the AMGOT guys aren't moving into towns fast enough to get them off his plate. The head of AMGOT, a guy named Lord Rennell, tries to explain, "Hey, my officers can't get there because your army won't give us any trucks." And Montgomery's response? He just waves them off. He tells the Major General that his officers should just get cracking on a bike. He saw their critical mission as nothing more than a headache getting in his way.
I mean, his contempt for them was just off the charts. He basically called the entire administration a bunch of useless, rich elites. He completely missed the point that without their work, without food and clean water and some kind of order, his own army wouldn't have been able to function at all.
So where does that leave us? What's the big picture here? Well, it suggests that maybe we need to completely rethink what we mean when we talk about war. It's so much more than just the battles.
Look, according to AMGOT's own chief, they had two jobs, and there was a very clear hierarchy. Job number one, the top priority, was always military necessity, whatever it takes to help the armies win. Job number two, taking care of the civilians, that was a distant second, something to be done only if it didn't get in the way of job number one.
So here's the real takeaway. The story of the heroic generals that we all know and love, it's just one tiny piece of the truth. The real story of war is also about the friction between supposed friends, the crushing weight of bureaucracy, and the desperate, thankless job of trying to piece a broken world back together. The most important history isn't always in the battle plans. Sometimes it's buried in the paperwork.
And that kind of leaves you wondering, doesn't it? If the famous heroes we always celebrate are only telling us a fraction of the story, what other vital, unglamorous, and completely forgotten histories are out there just waiting to be told? Whose stories have we been missing all this time?